Hi world, it's Saturday, it's the 27th of October 2018. It's about 11 a.m. in the morning UK time. I'm looking at Saturn. I had an email from someone who said, I've had 3 readings from different astrologers in this last year, and I'm a newbie to astrologer, and they're all calling this planet Saturn the Great Malefic. What's your thoughts on this and the Saturn return? And I thought, yeah, that's a really good question. So, Saturn is in Capricorn. Saturn moved into Capricorn in December 2017. It will leave finally in December 2020. It's going to flirt in 2020 with the start of Aquarius, but it will go back into Capricorn. So it'll be in Capricorn for a total of 3 years. Let's have a look at Saturn, especially the Saturn return. Saturn itself is the furthest most planet that can be seen with the naked eye. Recently, we've had some good views of Saturn, especially as about 4 months ago, Mars was very close to Saturn and we were all getting good views of it. Because Saturn is the furthest most planet that you can actually see, one of its basic principles is that of boundaries. You can't see any planets beyond Saturn. The only things you can see beyond Saturn are stars or other extremely large celestial phenomena. Saturn is nowhere near as big as Jupiter, but it's a lot further out than Jupiter. It is a gas giant, but it is much, much colder. It's 2.5 times further away from the sun than Jupiter. So whereas Jupiter's gas is active, Saturn's gas is relatively inert, and it's a kind of liquid ice, if you like. It freezes every so often and compacts in on itself into ice crystals of various inert gases. And because of that compression of gravity, that's why Saturn is seen as the planet of pressure, gravity and stress. And of course, Saturn is most famous because it has rings around it. Hence the principle of limitation and restriction. Saturn goes round the sun on average every 29 years and I think it's 7 to 8 months, which is the phenomenon known as the Saturn return. Every 29.5 years, Saturn in the sky comes back to its original position. The Saturn return. Most people see 2 Saturn returns in their life. A few see 3, 1 or 2 only see 1. The first Saturn return at 29.5 years old is at a flippant level what it makes people under 30 different from those over 30. In the first 30 years of life, Saturn passes through every sign of the zodiac, it passes through every house in your individual horoscope and makes every aspect to every planet in your individual chart. Saturn gives you a taste of everything in the first 30 years. And because of Saturn's principles, this is why the first 30 years of life are generally seen as, from a Saturnine point of view, as being really tough. For those people under 30 who study astrology, Saturn is sometimes known as that total bastard, because he deals with words like restriction, limitation, frustration, authority, circumstances outside of one's control that hold one back and restrict oneself from moving forward. The brakes are permanently on. Post-Saturn return, Saturn does become a bit easier. But I often find that it's not until the first Saturn square, until Saturn has completed a quarter of its cycle again, around 36, 37 years old, that individuals really begin to appreciate Saturn for what it really is. And the Saturn half return at 43, 44 years old is often a major point of individual maturity. This coincides with the Neptune quarter return, the Uranus half return, and various other planetary cycles, which all happen around 42, 43, 44. making this an important time for most people. It's the halfway point in life. Post 44, Saturn ceases to be so much limitation, restriction, frustration and authority, and instead becomes much more words like structure, boundary, discipline, hard bloody work, and eventually success. For Saturn return itself, especially the first Saturn return, is normally experienced as being a very challenging time. When I see people going through their first Saturn return, I say to them, look, you have no choice now. You either put the brakes on yourself or the brakes will be put on. And it is better to act than it is to react. During the first Saturn return, it is a time to reassess your life at 29 years old, 30 years old, and to ask yourself, right, what have I done so far? What have I learnt? Because the first 30 years of life are all about learning. What's good for me? What's not? Who, what can I let go of? And this is why the Saturn return is often seen as a time of loss. To those astrologically uneducated people, it's seen as a time of shortage, restriction, loss, challenge, and things ending. But actually, it's not quite like that. The Saturn return is instead a time of weeding and pruning, streamlining, letting go of those things, people, situations and environments that are past their sell-by date and have reached the end of their shelf life. It is not so much loss. It is clearing the decks so that when the future comes in, it doesn't have to negotiate old baggage and it's got clear access. Not for nothing is Saturn sometimes known as the Grim Reaper, one of his representations as being the skeleton in the cowl with a scythe. It does speak of clearing away the dead wood, and indeed that's what Saturn does. But he never takes anything that's wholesome, hearty, vibrant, meaningful, substantial. Where something's working, Saturn will firm it up. Now the second Saturn return is a very different story. When I talk to clients who are just coming up for the second Saturn return, I go, yeah, you're 58, 59, Saturn's coming. And they go, oh my God, please tell me it's not going to be like 29 again. And I say, no, it's not. Because most people spend so much time worrying about the second Saturn return that they get all the difficult stuff done first. So it goes very easily for them. And secondly, the second Saturn return isn't about hardship and challenge and restriction unless you've been living your life wrong. If you've not been doing what you're meant to be doing, if you're not living your life in a way that brings fulfillment and contentment to yourself, then the second Saturn return will be a challenging time. But generally, in my experience, for most people, the second Saturn return is less of a time of restriction, limitation and challenge, and more of a time of gentle nudges, refining, streamlining, purifying. And it's more of a time where it's just a sort of gentle push in one direction or another. Still, there's an element of releasing and letting go, because by the time you are 58, 59, you are coming to the end of middle age. You're not approaching old age. You're entering what I call classic or vintage age. Now, that's where I am at the moment. I'm in my mid-60s. And I think that lasts until you're into 72, at which point you start to become elderly. Old starts around 84, I think. The Uranus return. The third Saturn return, which happens around 87, 88 years old, and not that many people get there, about sort of 25% of people. This is the time of reflection. This is a time where they come to peace with themselves, they accept the fact that one day they're not going to wake up, and they put their affairs in order, but they also sit back and they start really enjoying life for every minute that they have left. Saturn is now in Capricorn, the sign that it's most commonly recognised as working with. Saturn rules Capricorn, so Saturn's comfortable there. Capricorn's tenets of words like structure, government, order, hard work are music to Saturn's ears. People born with Saturn in Capricorn generally have a good work ethic and are generally quite good with words like loyalty, self-discipline and boundary. But now Saturn is moving forward again. Saturn stopped going retrograde at the beginning, in the first week of September 2018, and it is now moving forward. It is still covering the ground that it covered earlier this year. So many people are still going through their Saturn return. And even if you're not 29 or 58, 59, many of you will still be finding that Saturn is hitting you. Anybody who has planets between 2 and 9 degrees of Capricorn, Cancer, Libra and Aries, regardless whether it's Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, or the outer planets, or the ascendant or midheaven, these are the people whom Saturn is affecting in a challenging way. And with Saturn's cycle, when Saturn, it's a classic retrograde cycle. It moves forwards, stands still, goes backwards, stands still, moves forwards again, and then the next year stands still, goes backwards, and then moves forwards again. So it's this three-pronged loop all the time. And there is about somewhere between 8 to 10% of its path where Saturn only passes over once. Most of its time, it passes over a point in the sky 3 times during its cycle. Forward, backward, forward. When it only passes over once, I say to a lot of people, I say, right, Saturn's going to land on top of your whatever, or opposite your whatever. It's only going to happen once. And they look at me and go, okay, what does that mean? I say, well, the good side is that it's, instead of lasting 9 months, Saturn's influence is only going to last 2 weeks. And they go, oh, great. And then I say, yeah, but that means you're going to get 9 months worth of challenge in 2 weeks. But it's going to be a short, sharp impact rather than a long, drawn-out affair. There's pros and cons to both sides. But what I find as I get older is it gets easier to recognise Saturn cycles. As Saturn moves forward in the first pass, let's use 2018 as an example. As Saturn moves forward in 2018, it started passing over new ground from the period of December 2017 through to about March, April 2018. And during this time, those people with planets in the degrees I've previously mentioned, the start of the cardinal signs, all went through periods of sudden increase in restriction and limitation and challenge. Then Saturn stood still and started going backwards and was moving retrograde for 4 months, 4 and a bit months, over the period of mid-April to late August, early September. And when Saturn is retrograde, this is a time for retrospect, reassessment, reevaluation, asking yourself, what have I done? Have I done it right? Is this correct for me? Is this the right thing to do? If not, what have I done wrong? How can I correct it in the future? And then Saturn moves forward again, in this case from the start of September through to early December. By the time Saturn is into the middle of December of this year, it will have cleared all the positions it's passed over already this year and be entering a brief period between 9.5 degrees of Capricorn and 13.5 degrees of Capricorn, where it will only pass over certain points once instead of 3 times. The third phase of Saturn is doing it right, getting it right, or consolidating and establishing existing patterns of self-sabotage or doing it wrong so that they become entrenched and almost permanent in your life. When Saturn is moving forward, especially on the third and final pass, I find myself invariably saying to clients something along the lines of, right, Saturn is coming. You have 2 options. You can either spend the next 9 months complaining about how tired you are, how unsupported you feel, how alone you are, how unappreciated you are, how hard you're working and no one even notices, let alone say thanks, and why is my life so crap, and poor me. Or you can do what those who know what Saturn's about and go, right, Saturn's in town, nose meet the grindstone. Stay below the radar screen, work damn hard. No shortcuts, Do everything the hard way. 4 steps forward, 3 steps back. You do this over a 9-month Saturn cycle. You put in place roots and foundations which then act as the bedrock for future growth, perhaps for as long as the next 30 years, especially if it is your Saturn return, or Saturn conjunct your Sun or conjunct your Moon. Next year, Saturn is going to pass over the Sun position and opposite the Sun position and square the Sun position of those people born from, say, the 5th, 6th through to the 14th, 15th of January, July, April, October. So Saturn's coming for you, same as it's been hitting people earlier than you this year. And for those of you who are going through any difficult Saturn transits at the moment and who are of a certain age, then look back 29 years to 1990 when Saturn was last in early Capricorn and ask yourself, what were you doing then? 29 years old, and the same patterns are repeating themselves, but hopefully this time with 29 years extra maturity, knowledge, wisdom and experience. Saturn's principle is clear. He will sit on your shoulder and look you in the eye constantly and say, right, if you cheat, if you take the shortcut, I will hammer you. And you will constantly be moaning the difficulties in your life and why doesn't anything work for me. But if you work at it, if you do everything the hard way, and if you bring Saturn / Capricorn's principles of loyalty, self-discipline, boundary, structure, order and hard work into the equation, after all, it's so much easier to live within your own boundaries rather than those pushed on you by others. If you do it Saturn's way, he will guide you, aid you and assist you, and he will help you build roots and foundations for the long-term future. What's not to like? Saturn is not a lightweight, but he is not malefic. No planetary energy is malefic or benefic, and the ancients who described Venus and Jupiter as the lesser and greater benefic and Mars and Saturn as the lesser and greater malefic, I'm not saying they were wrong. Maybe they were right at the time that they used that terminology, but in the 21st century, every planet has their positive and negative. There's light and dark in everyone and everywhere. So I think it really is time, to quote Liz Green's wonderful book on Saturn, I think it's time for a new look at an old devil. And it's time to reappraise Saturn and to welcome him into your life. I love Saturn. Yeah, he's a total bastard sometimes, but he's my best friend because he's taught me the value of hard, disciplined, focused, concentrated work. And that is guaranteed over the course of many years to bring success. With Saturn, always do it the hard way. Catch you later, world. If you're going for your Saturn return, get stuck in, it's nearly over. Another month, maybe 6 weeks at the most, a whole new Saturn cycle begins. And won't we all be glad for that? Catch you later, world. Bye.